There is a darkness that lives within every human being, not evil in its essence, but repressed, ignored, denied. It is the part of us we refuse to acknowledge, the emotions we bury under smiles, the envy we disguise as righteousness, the rage we cover with control. The more a person denies this darkness, the more it grows in secrecy, taking on a life of its own. For the narcissist, this hidden side is not just a quiet corner of the mind. It is the monster behind the mask, silently waiting for the day the mask cracks. The narcissist spends a lifetime running from their shadow. They create grand illusions to escape it: titles, followers, possessions, power. They need others not because they love them, but because they cannot love themselves without reflection. Every compliment is a breath of air for their suffocating ego. Every admire becomes a mirror, reinforcing the fragile image they've built. But no illusion lasts forever. The human psyche is not built to sustain falsity indefinitely. Sooner or later, the shadow begins to stir. It starts as restlessness, a quiet dissatisfaction, even when everything seems perfect. They may achieve success, recognition, attention, yet something inside remains empty, hungry, resentful. This is the first whisper of the shadow, the repressed truth rising like smoke from a fire beneath the floorboards. They try to silence it with distractions, manipulation, and validation, but it keeps returning, because what is buried alive never dies. It waits. The more they suppress it, the stronger it becomes. Every act of deceit feeds it. Every manipulation gives it shape. Every false smile adds another layer of darkness behind their eyes. The shadow collects everything they refuse to feel: their shame, fear, guilt, and helplessness. It becomes a living entity within them, knowing them better than they know themselves. And though they believe they are in control, it is the shadow that writes their script, choosing their obsessions, their cruelty, their endless search for admiration. It whispers that they must dominate, belittle, and control to survive. And they obey, thinking these thoughts are their own. But the shadow does not serve. It waits for balance. It is a debt collector of the soul. As time passes, the narcissist begins to experience cracks in their perfect reflection. Relationships break down. Friends pull away. Their audience thins. Suddenly, the world stops feeding their image, and the silence feels unbearable. This is when the shadow steps forward. Without the distractions of external validation, the narcissist is forced to look inward, and what they see terrifies them. For years, they have projected their darkness onto others, accusing them of betrayal, selfishness, or weakness. Now the accusations echo back, and they realize they were speaking about themselves all along. The shadow becomes a haunting presence. It whispers during sleepless nights, reminding them of every person they've hurt, every lie they've told, every time they chose pride over empathy. Guilt creeps in, but pride resists. They fight to maintain the illusion, but the energy required to keep it alive becomes unbearable. Reality begins to collapse around them. Careers falter. Relationships disintegrate. Health declines. The shadow, once hidden, becomes visible through their breakdowns, their anger, their despair. It shows itself not as punishment, but as the truth they could not face. In their desperation, they may seek new sources of attention, new victims to feed their starving ego. But the shadow follows everywhere, relentless and patient. The more they try to escape, the deeper they sink. Their once grand persona starts to decay. They begin to experience moments of uncontrollable emotion, tears they cannot explain, bursts of rage that frighten even themselves. The mask no longer fits, and the person beneath feels hollow, almost unrecognizable. For the narcissist, this confrontation with the shadow is not enlightenment, it is collapse. The false self they've constructed cannot withstand the weight of truth. They have spent years avoiding vulnerability, so when the real self demands acknowledgement, it feels like death. And in a way, it is the death of illusion, the disintegration of the false God they created in their own image. The shadow does not seek to destroy, only to balance. Yet for the one who has lived in denial, balance feels like destruction. What returns is not vengeance, but equilibrium. The parts they buried demand to be integrated. The shame, the guilt, the humanity they denied. But the narcissist, addicted to superiority, cannot easily surrender to humility. They resist, and that resistance becomes suffering. They are haunted by memories, by the echoes of those they used, by the silent realization that their power was an elaborate disguise for fear. Every denial becomes a chain, every lie, a thread that binds them tighter to the darkness. The shadow does not fade with time, it matures, sharpens, evolves. It learns their weaknesses, their insecurities, their patterns. And then, when they are most alone, when the applause has faded and the mirrors are shattered, the shadow returns to claim what has always belonged to it. The ego begins as a necessary compass, the voice that says, I am. It helps us navigate the world, define our individuality, and protect our sense of worth. But when that voice grows too loud, when it begins to drown out empathy, humility, and truth, it becomes a storm. The narcissist ego is not merely inflated, it is overwhelmed, swollen with illusion, so fragile that even the smallest pin of reality can make it implode. What begins as confidence turns into delusion. What looks like strength becomes dependence on endless validation. And beneath that shining surface of superiority lies a trembling fear of exposure. To the narcissist, the ego becomes a god. Every action, every word, every relationship revolves around maintaining its worship. They cannot afford cracks in their image because cracks let in truth, and truth is fatal to their false self. So they build high walls of arrogance and control. They rewrite stories to always make themselves the hero or the victim, never the cause. Every compliment is consumed like oxygen, every disagreement seen as an attack. Their world becomes a fragile theater, one that must be constantly rehearsed and defended. The applause must never stop, because silence feels like annihilation. But the more they feed this ego, the more hollow it becomes. Inflated things lose density. They look large, but contain nothing. The narcissist's life follows this same law. Their achievements, though they may glitter, lack substance. Their relationships, though intense, are transactional. They collect people the way others collect trophies. Proof of greatness, tokens of admiration. Yet behind every conquest lies emptiness. They crave more and more, not because they are fulfilled, but because the satisfaction never lasts. It evaporates the moment attention shifts away, leaving them desperate for the next fix of admiration. Over time, the inflated ego becomes unsustainable. It demands constant maintenance. Every person must play their role. Every situation must affirm the narcissist's image. But the world does not bend forever. Sooner or later, reality resists. Someone speaks up. A lie is revealed. A facade breaks. When this happens, the ego panics. It scrambles to reassert dominance through anger, blame, manipulation, or victimhood. Anything to avoid the unbearable truth that they are not what they pretend to be. But no defense can protect them forever from the truth, pressing inward. What they fail to see is that the ego's inflation is not expansion, it is distortion. It stretches their sense of self so far from their authentic core that they no longer know who they are. Their identity becomes performance, and their emotions become tools. Even love, the most human of feelings, becomes a currency of control. They love not to connect, but to conquer. They give affection as bait, withdraw it as punishment, and call it passion. But beneath it all, the ego trembles, terrified of collapse, aware that its entire kingdom is built on lies. As cracks begin to appear, anxiety creeps in. They may lash out more frequently, desperate to reassert superiority. They accuse others of betrayal, not realizing that their own inflated pride is what isolates them. The more they lose control, the more extreme their behavior becomes. Rage erupts at the smallest slight. Tears are weaponized. Manipulation grows more desperate. These are not signs of power, but symptoms of decay. The ego is collapsing under its own weight, crushed by the very illusions that once held it aloft. When the collapse begins, it is not always visible to the outside world. It happens internally first, the quiet panic of a person realizing that no amount of praise can silence their inner void. They start to feel the unbearable loneliness that their ego once hid. The admiration that once sustained them now feels shallow. People begin to withdraw, exhausted by the endless need for attention. Without an audience, the narcissist starts to disintegrate. The grandiose persona falters, revealing insecurity so raw it feels like exposure. They might spiral into despair, depression, or rage, but it all points to the same truth. The ego that sought to be godlike is now devouring its creator. The collapse of an inflated ego is never graceful. It's violent, chaotic, humiliating. The same mouth that once spoke with authority now trembles with confusion. The same eyes that demanded admiration now avoid mirrors. The narcissist feels as if the world has betrayed them, when in truth it is their false self that has turned against them. The ego that once promised safety now delivers ruin, because no lie can survive forever inside the human psyche. The mind hungers for authenticity, and when denied it for too long, it begins to revolt from within. Every false layer peels away, the superiority, the charm, the charisma, revealing the small, frightened child beneath. This child, long ignored, begins to scream. It was never given love, only performance. It was never allowed to be human, only divine. And now, in the ruins of its own illusion, it demands to be seen. But for the narcissist, that demand feels unbearable. To face it would mean surrendering everything they've built, every identity, every defense, every lie told to survive. The inflated ego does not burst in an instant. It deflates slowly, painfully, dragging the person through their own hollow spaces, forcing them to confront the nothingness they tried to escape by becoming everything. There is a quiet horror in living a life built on denial. For the narcissist, every emotion that threatens their perfection is exiled. Every fear, every flaw, every trace of guilt. But nothing exiled ever disappears, it simply changes form. The psyche, unable to bear the weight of buried truths, finds another outlet. It casts those unwanted parts onto others. This is projection, the act of accusing others of what one refuses to see in oneself. It begins as a defense, a way to protect the fragile self-image from collapse. But over time, it becomes a prison of mirrors from which there is no escape. The narcissist projects because they cannot accept that they are human. To admit fault would shatter the illusion of superiority. So instead they manufacture villains, scapegoats, and enemies. If they feel jealousy, they call others envious. If they lie, they accuse others of dishonesty. If they manipulate, they insist that they are the victim. This inversion of reality is not simply deceit, it is survival. The narcissist cannot live in truth, so they construct an alternate world where they are eternally right, eternally innocent, eternally wrong. Each projection is a brick in the walls of their psychological prison. They think they are protecting themselves, but in truth, they are enclosing themselves within an ever-tightening space. With each accusation, they distance themselves further from their own emotions. They lose the ability to see clearly, because every uncomfortable feeling must be assigned to someone else. Over time, the external world becomes distorted, full of imagined threats and disloyalty. They begin to distrust everyone, even those who love them, because their projections reflect not reality, but their own internal chaos. Projection turns relationships into battlefields. To love a narcissist is to be cast in endless roles you never auditioned for. The betrayer, the controller, the ungrateful one. You become the mirror that absorbs their darkness so they can stay spotless in their own eyes. Every time you try to show them the truth, they twist it into proof that you are the problem. This constant reversal of blame is not random, it is a survival mechanism. Deep down, they know that if the mirror ever reflected accurately, they would crumble under the weight of their own contradictions. In their world, guilt is always external. They cannot apologize because apology would mean recognition of wrongdoing, and recognition would expose the false self they work so hard to maintain. So they rewrite every story. They are never the one who lied. You misunderstood. They are never cruel. You provoked them. They are never distant. You demanded too much. Through these rewrites, they protect the illusion of moral superiority, but the cost is immense. The more they blame others, the less they can see themselves. The less they see themselves, the more alienated they become from their own humanity. The prison of projection is lined with mirrors that all point outward. They reflect everyone but the self, and yet the unconscious mind never forgets. Beneath the justifications and excuses, something stirs, a faint recognition that all those qualities they despise in others are strangely familiar. The narcissist spends years running from this recognition, attacking it wherever they see it, never realizing they are attacking themselves. They live in constant war with their own reflection, mistaking it for the enemy. As the years pass, the system of projections begins to break down. Reality starts to intrude. People leave, patterns repeat, chaos grows. The narcissist begins to notice that no matter how many enemies they blame, the same pain returns. The same failures, the same loneliness, the same drama. They are haunted by repetition because the lesson remains unlearned. Projection cannot destroy truth. It only delays confrontation. The buried emotions keep surfacing, disguised as external conflicts, until there is nowhere left to point fingers. When isolation arrives, it feels undeserved. The narcissist cannot understand why everyone turns away, why relationships end in bitterness, why trust evaporates. In their mind, the world is unjust, filled with disloyalty and betrayal. But what they see outside is only the echo of what lives inside. The betrayals they accuse others of are reflections of the betrayal they committed against themselves. the betrayal of denying their own heart. Projection has blinded them to the origin of their pain. They are trapped in a cycle where every attempt to escape guilt only deepens it. In this prison, the narcissist becomes both warden and inmate. They police others' behavior, hunt for imagined flaws, and craft endless narratives of victimhood, not realizing that every accusation tightens the chains around their own psyche. They cannot trust anyone because the parts of themselves they refuse to acknowledge are constantly projected onto others. If they cannot face their own deceit, everyone looks deceitful. If they cannot admit their own anger, everyone seems hostile. Their reality becomes a reflection of their internal war, and they live in a world of ghosts. Ghosts they created. The cruelest irony is that the only escape from projection is self-awareness, the very thing they fear most. To look inward would mean facing the emotions they've banished for years. Shame, inadequacy, grief. But until they do, they remain prisoners of their own design, surrounded by mirrors that endlessly replay their disowned truths, mistaking reflection for attack, never realizing that every accusation they cast is just another name for the self they cannot bear to see. There is a natural law that governs the inner world as surely as gravity governs the outer. It is the law of balance, a quiet but relentless force that pulls every soul toward wholeness. When one part of the psyche grows too dominant, when pride smothers humility or desire silences conscience, this law begins to work in silence, slowly correcting the imbalance. The narcissist, however, lives in constant defiance of this law. They exalt one part of themselves, the false, inflated self, while burying the rest beneath layers of denial. They feed the illusion of perfection and starve the reality of their humanity. But no one can live in imbalance forever. What is repressed does not vanish, it waits for its time to return. The narcissist's entire existence is an act of imbalance. They worship power while fearing vulnerability, chase admiration while rejecting authenticity, and speak endlessly of self-love while knowing nothing of self-acceptance. Their inner world tilts toward excess, excessive pride, excessive control, excessive need. Every exaggerated trait is a reaction to something they cannot face. Arrogance covers insecurity, dominance hides fear, charm masks manipulation. They live on one extreme of the emotional spectrum, pretending that the other half does not exist. But the psyche is not so easily deceived. The soul keeps score. Every distortion demands correction. Balance begins to seek its way back through cracks in the facade. It starts subtly through tension, dissatisfaction, and restlessness. Even when the narcissist has everything they crave, status, followers, admiration, something feels off. The applause no longer satisfies. The praise feels hollow. They begin to experience moments of emptiness so deep it borders on panic. That emptiness is the echo of their neglected self, the part that has been silenced for years. The soul, denied expression, begins to knock from within. It wants recognition, integration, equilibrium. The narcissist calls it boredom, depression, or betrayal, but it is the natural weight of imbalance pulling them back toward truth. When the soul seeks balance, it does not negotiate. It uses whatever means necessary to restore order. For some, it comes through failure, for others through loss, illness, or heartbreak. The narcissist experiences these moments as unfair punishment, unable to see that life is merely reflecting the imbalance they have created. The relationships they exploit begin to collapse. The admiration they rely on turns into criticism. Their control over others weakens. What they thought were victories turn to ashes. Each event that humbles them is an attempt by the psyche to bring them closer to equilibrium. But instead of listening, they fight harder, inflating themselves even more to resist the descent. The more they resist, the harsher the correction becomes. The soul's pursuit of balance is not cruel, but to those who live in falsehood, it feels brutal. Every truth they denied becomes a confrontation. Every suppressed emotion becomes a storm. Their mind begins to divide against itself. One part clings to the mask, the other demands authenticity. They oscillate between grandiosity and despair, confidence and self-loathing. This inner swing is the manifestation of imbalance trying to find its midpoint. But the narcissist, addicted to extremes, cannot rest in moderation. They need to be adored or destroyed, powerful or worthless, never simply human. To live in balance would mean to feel ordinary, and to them, ordinary feels like death. The search for balance extends beyond the mind into the body and spirit. The constant strain of maintaining superiority takes its toll. Sleep becomes restless. Anxiety sharpens. Their health declines under the pressure of sustaining a persona that is always on display. The body mirrors what the soul has known all along. There is no peace in one-sided living. The tension of imbalance eventually manifests in every domain: psychological, emotional, physical. The universe does not punish, it mirrors. And what it mirrors back to the narcissist is the truth they most fear. Their power was never power, only imbalance dressed as control. In moments of collapse, when everything they built begins to crumble, the forgotten parts of the self start to surface. Guilt, shame, compassion, vulnerability, the very emotions they once despised now emerge, demanding to be felt. But instead of embracing them, the narcissist resists, terrified of losing control. They do not understand that these feelings are not enemies. They are the soul's instruments of balance. They exist to make the person whole again. Yet every act of resistance creates more suffering. The psyche tightens, the tension grows, and the imbalance deepens until the pressure becomes unbearable. The process of rebalancing is slow and merciless. The narcissist finds themselves in a constant tug of war between illusion and reality. They may feel moments of clarity, flashes of humility, glimpses of remorse, but they quickly retreat into denial. They cannot yet live with both light and shadow. They must choose one. But the soul does not obey the ego's commands. It continues to draw attention to the parts they avoid, repeating lessons through people, patterns and pain. Every failed relationship, every betrayal, every humiliation is an echo of the same message: balance must be restored. The human spirit cannot thrive in one-sidedness. Just as day needs night, strength needs softness, and pride needs humility, the psyche needs all its elements in harmony. The narcissist's tragedy lies in their refusal to integrate these opposites. They seek only to expand one half of themselves, believing that dominance over their weaknesses will bring peace. But peace does not come from domination, it comes from reconciliation. Until they allow the neglected self to breathe, they remain at war within their own soul, caught in a perpetual imbalance that no amount of power or praise can silence. There is a truth that few will accept until they have no choice. Suffering is not just pain, it is revelation. It strips away illusion, burns through denial, and drags a person face to face with what they've spent their entire life avoiding. For the narcissist, suffering arrives like a thief in the night, uninvited, relentless, unavoidable. It enters when their carefully constructed reality begins to crumble. The mask slips, the admiration fades, and the false power they once clung to dissolves into silence. What remains is the raw, unfiltered truth of the self they have refused to meet. The narcissist has spent years building a world that revolves around control, adoration, and superiority. Every moment of praise acts as a drug, numbing the ache of emptiness underneath. They live in a constant performance, terrified that if they stop acting, they will cease to exist. But the human soul was not designed to live in performance forever. The psyche can only carry the weight of falsehood for so long before it begins to crack under its own pressure. That cracking is the beginning of suffering, the first sign that the soul is fighting its way back to truth. Suffering dismantles the illusions that the narcissist worships. It comes through loss, betrayal, humiliation, or failure, experiences that shatter the inflated image they worked so hard to protect. At first, they resist it with everything they have. They blame others, lash out, or retreat into bitterness. They cannot comprehend that the very pain they despise is the medicine their soul has prescribed. It is not punishment, but purification. The false self must break so the real self can breathe. But to the narcissist, this process feels like annihilation. They mistake the death of the ego for the death of the self, not realizing that one must die for the other to be born. In suffering, the narcissist faces a silence they have never known. There is no applause, no validation, no one left to mirror the image they created. They are alone with the one presence they have spent a lifetime avoiding, their own consciousness. It is in this solitude that the whispers begin, faint memories of guilt, glimpses of empathy, sensations of regret. These are not weaknesses, they are fragments of humanity returning to claim their place. But to a person addicted to power and control, vulnerability feels unbearable. They try to suppress it again, to rebuild the mask, but suffering has already opened the door. Once awareness enters, it cannot be fully shut out. The great paradox of suffering is that it destroys everything false while revealing everything real. When the narcissist world collapses, they begin to see the people they once used as mirrors in a new light. They recall the kindness they mocked, the love they dismissed, the loyalty they betrayed. Shame begins to surface, though it arrives as confusion, anger, or despair. Their mind fights the truth, but their soul recognizes it. The pain they feel is not only from loss, it is the agony of rebirth. The self that was buried under ego begins to stir, fragile and trembling, yet alive. Suffering also dismantles the narcissist's illusion of control. They are forced to confront what they cannot manipulate: time, consequence, emotion, mortality. The reality that everyone else lives with becomes their new terrain, and it terrifies them. Without control, they feel naked, exposed, and powerless. Yet it is only in this state of powerlessness that real transformation becomes possible. Control is the fortress of the ego. Surrender is the gateway of the soul. When the narcissist reaches the point where no strategy, no charm, and no manipulation can save them, they stand on the threshold of awakening, though they may not yet recognize it. The suffering deepens when they realize that no one can be blamed anymore. The world is not conspiring against them, it is reflecting them. Every betrayal they endured was a mirror of their own deception. Every rejection they experienced was a reflection of the love they withheld. Every downfall was an echo of their refusal to face themselves, These realizations come not as epiphanies, but as wounds. They cut deep, leaving behind humility, the first true feeling they have known in years. Through pain, the narcissist encounters the humanity they have long despised. They begin to feel what others feel, the ache of loneliness, the yearning for forgiveness, the hunger for meaning. These sensations are foreign, frightening, yet profoundly real. The soul, having been silenced for so long, now speaks through suffering. It does not whisper of glory or admiration. It speaks of truth, connection and acceptance. It reminds them that strength is not domination, but understanding, and love is not control, but surrender. There is a strange grace in this breaking. Suffering dismantles pride piece by piece until what remains is a person stripped of pretense. It is in this raw, uncertain state that awakening begins to take shape. The narcissist, who once believed themselves divine, is confronted with their own humanity. The very emotions they called weakness become their teachers. Guilt becomes compassion, fear becomes humility, loss becomes clarity. The pain that once felt unbearable becomes the only path toward freedom. Because when every illusion has burned away and all that remains is truth, the soul finally breathes in balance once more,